Hey guys, this is Matt Core from ctrl+paint.com, and today we are going to be talking about making a complicated background like this one, and we're going to be using a lot of the techniques from previous videos. And I think it's really important to stress when making a complicated background like this one that you're not going to be copying exactly what I'm doing. Really, the point of this little mini-series is just to show how some of the independent techniques that I've shown elsewhere in the library can work together in unexpected ways. And in this mini-series and future ones like it, it's going to be a way for me to link to earlier videos. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on each of these techniques, but rather it'll serve as sort of a way to mix and match stuff you've already learned. And if you haven't learned it yet, follow the links at the bottom of the post and you can watch all these videos yourself. So in this case, I am setting out to take an existing illustration. You can see this tank here, and I want to add a background. And so before we get too much into the actual painting part, it's going to be important to just isolate where we're going to be adding content. We don't want to have to carefully paint our way around the edge of this tank. So the way I'm going to do that is with a layer mask, specifically on a group. But to get there, I'm going to start by using paths. Paths for me are just the best way to make selections. So I'm just going to start outlining my background. And this is one of those things that just takes practice, and as I've shown in other videos, you'll get the hang of it. And then once I've completed my path, I can just open up the Paths palette, Control-click on that new path. Then I'm going to make a layer group and set that mask to control where the paint goes. Okay, so now we don't have to worry about painting inside the lines. The next step for me is to lay out the basic elements. And as you saw in the example, there's some repetition going on here. Specifically, there are large silos and there are smaller ladders. And both of them are really the same thing, just repeated over and over, and then integrated into the painting. So in order to do that, I'm actually going to take advantage of smart objects. And I'm going to work on the first silo outside of this group, because I just want to be able to make it on its own layer. So I'd essentially just start painting. And you know, the way you go about painting this is very much up to you. This is really just paint an object and get it roughed in. We're not going for final details at this stage. But for mine, I've actually gone ahead and painted this already. So I'm just going to bring this one right into my scene. Now there's really nothing special about this. It's a single layer and that's good enough for now. And then the crucial step here is that I convert it to be a smart object. Now this means I can scale it any way I want and it's going to be non-destructive. So I'll bring this into my group. So now it is in the correct part of my painting. I can move it around and it's always going to be in that background area that I've defined. Now all I need to do is decide where I want them in my image. And this is where it's so nice to work with something that's non-destructive like this smart object, because I'm going to be duplicating this around my scene and I'm going to need to be correcting for perspective, and that's going to mean skewing. I'm also going to be shrinking them down. And really all of these things would be very messy if I were not working with a smart object. So really what I'm doing here is just thinking aesthetically. I'm thinking about composition. What's going to look good? Now at this point, you might notice that I have not been naming my layers very carefully. So it's a good idea to go ahead and give these names because it's going to be helpful to be able to locate them later in the process. So I'm just going to call these silos. Now next I'm going to want to make sure I include my ladders. But ladders in this case are a little beyond the scope of what we've got left for this video. So I'm actually going to start by making just placeholders. So I'm going to call this placeholder ladder, convert it to be a smart object, and then I'm just going to work in the exact same way, knowing that I'm going to be able to replace the content later. So anywhere I think a ladder might be interesting, I'm just going to kind of rough it in. I'm totally going to change the perspective later. This is really just a rough cut. So it reminds me more than anything that this is going to be a ladder. Okay, so far you might not be very impressed visually. It looks like a bunch of placeholder graphics, nothing's really integrated, but stick with me on this. What we're doing here is working in sort of a non-linear workflow. In the next video, we're going to add some detail elements, and then following that, we're going to integrate all the colors and the values to make it all match. So stay tuned for future videos, and hopefully you can get some inspiration from different ways of using these Photoshop techniques. Have fun painting, guys. Thanks for coming to the site.